On June 24th of 2026, the United States Department of War, the institution that most people still call the Pentagon, published a 25-page document that used a word no military strategy document uses lightly. The word was existential, not concerning, not serious, not significant. Existential. That is the word the Pentagon's chief information officer chose to describe what happens to United States military dominance, the moment an adversary achieves a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And that document, the Post-Quantum Cryptography Strategy, released on June 24th, was only the most visible piece of a much larger, mostly hidden mobilization that has been building inside the American defense establishment for years. The three technologies the Defense Science Board identified as holding the most promise for the military, quantum sensing, quantum computing, and quantum communications, are now the subject of classified line items scattered throughout a $179 billion research and development budget programs that are specifically designed to be invisible to foreign intelligence services, to Congress's oversight staff, and to the American public. The question that defense researchers, allied governments, and strategic analysts are all quietly asking right now is the same one this video is about to answer. What exactly is being hidden? Why is it being hidden now? And what does it tell us about how close the world actually is to a quantum inflection point that changes every military equation on Earth? Stay with us, because the public record alone is alarming enough. Like and subscribe before we go any further, because what the Pentagon has confirmed in unclassified documents is already more dramatic than most people realize. Let's start with the document that set all of this in motion, because the language inside it is genuinely extraordinary for a government publication. The Pentagon's Post-Quantum Cryptography Strategy, released 2 weeks ago as of this recording, was written under the direction of Chief Information Officer Kirsten Davies and explicitly frames the quantum threat not as a future concern to be monitored, but as a present danger that demands immediate enterprise-wide action. The strategy states with unusual directness that adversaries will continue to probe for weaknesses, that nearly every deployed military asset will be affected in some way, and that costs will be incurred regardless of how well the transition to quantum-resistant cryptography is managed. The risks it enumerates are specific and operational. Adversaries applying a cryptographically relevant quantum computer to collect and decrypt classified information transmitted over terrestrial networks, space-based communications, radio frequency systems, and other military infrastructure. Adversaries using quantum computing to take control of and weaponize the Defense Department's own systems. Adversaries installing unpredictable malware into weapons platforms and accessing command and control systems in active theaters of operation. These are not hypothetical scenarios constructed for a think tank report. They are the Pentagon's own assessment of what becomes possible the moment the quantum threshold is crossed by an adversary, and they are the reason the document sets a hard deadline of 2030 for deploying quantum-resistant cryptography on high-impact systems and 2031 for completing the transition across the entire force. Don't scroll past without subscribing, because the classified dimension of the quantum budget is where the real picture starts to emerge. The Pentagon's research and development budget for fiscal year 2026 totals $179 billion, up from $141 billion the prior year, representing one of the largest single-year increases in modern defense research spending. Quantum-related programs are, by design, not consolidated into a single visible line item. They are dispersed across multiple service branches, embedded within classified initiatives, and often labeled with designations that obscure their connection to quantum research in the unclassified budget documents available to the public. The most visible unclassified quantum line item is designated 06033330D8Z, called the Quantum Application Program, which crosses all service branches and points toward transitioning quantum concepts into real-world military use. Its dollar amount is not publicly listed, a designation that in Pentagon budgeting typically signals that the program is classified at the funding level, even if its existence is acknowledged. Post-quantum cryptography programs are addressed in classified and cyber defense line items under our Army and defense-wide cyber modernization efforts. Quantum sensing research appears embedded within intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance programs across multiple services. The Congressional Research Service, which provides nonpartisan analysis to Congress, noted explicitly that the total quantum investment is difficult to isolate due to the fragmented and classified nature of many programs. What the visible budget signals, even without the classified totals, is that quantum is no longer a fringe research area inside the Pentagon. It is being integrated as a cross-cutting enabler across multiple systems, communications architectures, and intelligence capabilities simultaneously, with the classified component of that investment almost certainly exceeding what the unclassified budget documents reveal. Like and subscribe right now, because the 3 quantum application areas the Defense Science Board identified tell you exactly what the Pentagon is most urgently trying to develop and protect. The Defense Science Board, which is the independent panel of scientific advisors that evaluates technology priorities for the Department of Defense, concluded in its most recent assessment that 3 applications of quantum technology hold the most promise for military use. Quantum sensing is the first, and by the DSB's assessment, the most mature. Quantum sensors use the extraordinary sensitivity of quantum mechanical systems to measure physical quantities with precision that classical instruments cannot approach. For the military, this translates into several specific capabilities that defense analysts have publicly identified as potentially revolutionary. Quantum gravimeters can detect submarines by sensing minute variations in the gravitational field caused by the mass of a submarine moving through water, potentially compromising the stealth advantage that American ballistic missile submarines depend on for nuclear deterrence. Quantum magnetometers can detect the magnetic signatures of ships, vehicles, and underground facilities with a sensitivity that exceeds classical sensors by orders of magnitude. Quantum inertial navigation systems can maintain precise positioning and timing without relying on GPS signals, which are vulnerable to jamming and spoofing in contested environments. Quantum atomic clocks deliver timing accuracy measured in picoseconds, enabling synchronized operations across satellites, radars, missile defense systems, and interceptors without dependence on external timing infrastructure. The DSB described quantum sensing as currently poised for mission use, which in defense procurement language means the technology is close enough to operational readiness that procurement decisions and fielding plans are actively being made. That is a materially different status than the quantum computing and communications categories, and it is one of the reasons that quantum sensing programs in the Pentagon budget are particularly likely to carry classified funding levels. Don't miss the submarine vulnerability angle, because it is the detail that explains most clearly why defense officials describe quantum as a potential equalizer in the strategic balance. The nuclear dimension of quantum sensing is the part of this story that defense officials are most careful about discussing publicly, and for obvious reasons. The United States nuclear deterrent rests on 3 legs: land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and nuclear-armed bombers. Of these 3, the submarine leg is considered the most survivable because ballistic missile submarines are designed to be essentially undetectable while on patrol, ensuring that even a catastrophic first strike against the other 2 legs, cannot eliminate the ability to retaliate. This guaranteed second strike capability is what makes nuclear deterrence credible, and it depends entirely on submarines remaining undetectable. A quantum gravimeter or magnetometer that can reliably track a submarine's position would undermine that assumption in ways that no amount of submarine redesign or tactical maneuvering can fully address, because the vulnerability stems from fundamental physics rather than any specific feature of the submarine that could be changed. The Center for Strategic and International Studies published an analysis specifically identifying quantum sensing as a threat to nuclear delivery platforms, long considered invulnerable, and the Defense Intelligence Agency's assessment publish. In May of 2025, reinforced that quantum-enabled advances will improve the targeting and long-range precision fires of any military that achieves operational quantum sensing capability before its adversaries. The classified component of quantum sensing research in the Pentagon budget is almost certainly addressing this specific scenario, developing both offensive quantum sensing capabilities and countermeasures against adversary quantum sensing. And the reason most of this work cannot be discussed publicly is precisely because discussing it openly would reveal what the United States knows and doesn't know about where adversary quantum sensing programs currently stand. Hit the like button right now, because the F-35 story the AT emerged in May of 2026 brings this from abstract strategy to concrete procurement action. On May 6th of 2026, a pre-solicitation notice appeared on the federal contracting database that most mainstream media outlets didn't cover at all. The F-35 Joint Program Office, operating through Naval Air Systems Command, announced its intention to award a sole source contract to Lockheed Martin Aeronautics for modifying the F-35's inline file encryption device software to support government-mandated quantum-resistant algorithms. The inline file encryption device is the hardware and software component responsible for encrypting and protecting the signed code that runs on the F-35 systems. Every piece of software on the aircraft that controls its radar, its weapon systems, its electronic warfare systems, its navigation, and its communications is cryptographically signed and verified by this device, which acts as the gatekeeper confirming that the software is authorized and hasn't been tampered with. A quantum-vulnerable IFED is not just a data security problem. It is a potential attack, surface for code integrity compromise, meaning that an adversary with a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could potentially verify false signatures on malicious code and introduce unauthorized software into one of the world's most capable combat aircraft without the aircraft's own security systems detecting the intrusion. Upgrading the IFED to quantum-resistant standards is therefore not a routine security patch. It is a fundamental upgrade to the aircraft's cyber resilience, and the fact that the Pentagon has moved this from a planning document to an active procurement action with a specific contractor and a specific aircraft system tells you something important about how urgently the threat timeline is being taken at the operational level of the defense establishment. Like and subscribe, because the executive orders that followed in June of 2026 brought the full picture into focus in a way that no single program announcement could. On June 22nd of 2026, President Trump signed 2 executive orders on quantum computing on the same day. This is an unusual event in technology policy. Executive orders tend to address issues one at a time unless there's a specific reason to signal urgency through paired action. The first order, Executive Order 14413, directed the federal government to accelerate quantum innovation, commercialization, deployment, manufacturing, and national security applications. The second, Executive Order 14412, addressed the cryptographic threat directly, warning that large-scale quantum computers and adversarial hands will threaten widely used cryptographic systems and enable hostile actors to collect encrypted American data now and decrypt it later. The harvest, now decrypt later threat referenced in the second executive order is not hypothetical. Intelligence analysts across the national security community believe that China, Russia, and potentially other adversaries are currently collecting and storing encrypted American communications, waiting for the day when quantum computing capability enables retroactive decryption of everything stored. Every classified cable, every encrypted intelligence report, every secure military communication transmitted today that is being collected by an adversary's signals intelligence apparatus is potentially readable the moment a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists. The executive orders represent the clearest public signal yet that the American government believes that moment is closer than most publicly available analysis has suggested, and that the window for protecting existing and future communications is narrowing in ways that demand executive-level action rather than bureaucratic planning cycles. The Pentagon's new strategy establishes 5 major lines of effort and 8 associated strategic goals, and the document's internal framing is worth examining closely because it reveals the order in which the Defense Department believes the quantum threat will materialize. The first and most immediate threat is the harvest, now decrypt later scenario, which is active today and does not require any future quantum computer to create a current intelligence problem. The second threat is the risk to digital signatures and authentication systems used by military communications, weapons platforms, and command and control infrastructure, which becomes acute the moment a cryptographically relevant quantum computer becomes operational. The third threat is the potential for adversaries to use quantum computing to enhance their AI-driven targeting, pattern recognition, and intelligence analysis capabilities, which represents a longer-term but potentially decisive operational advantage. The fourth threat, which the strategy addresses, but which remains largely classified in its specific application, is the quantum sensing threat to military platforms that currently depend on being undetectable. Each of these threat Pentagon's decision to release a comprehensive strategy document with specific deadlines, rather than a general research agenda, signals that the threat timelines are being driven by specific intelligence assessments about adversary capabilities rather than by general theoretical concerns. The document's use of the word existential in the introduction is not rhetorical flourish. It reflects an institutional judgment that the Department of War has made about what happens to American military dominance if the quantum transition is not managed successfully within the available window. China's quantum program is the adversary capability that gives all of these Pentagon documents their urgency, and understanding what China has actually built is essential to evaluating the level of alarm being expressed by American defense officials. China's disclosed investment in quantum technology through its 14th five-year plan alone was estimated at $15.3 billion by the Heritage Foundation, covering only publicly announced programs and explicitly excluding classified research. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's 2025 annual report to Congress described China as deploying industrial-scale funding and centralized coordination specifically aimed at seizing dominance in quantum systems. On the communication side, China has already built what is currently the largest quantum communication network in the world, a 10,000-kilometer space-ground integrated system incorporating the MISHIS satellite, the Jinan-1 microsatellite, 145 backbone nodes, 20 metropolitan networks, and coverage across 80 cities and 17 provinces. On the sensing side, Chinese research institutions have published results in quantum gravimetry and atomic interferometry that indicate active work on exactly the sensing modalities that American defense analysts have identified as most threatening to submarine detection and GPS-independent navigation. On the computing side, the Commission noted that China is deliberately obscuring the location and progress of its most sophisticated quantum computing programs, which is itself a signal that the programs in question are considered sensitive enough to warrant concealment from foreign intelligence services. American defense officials, who have received classified briefings on Chinese quantum capabilities, are expressing an alarm that the unclassified evidence alone does not fully explain, and that gap between the public evidence and the classified assessment is one of the most important questions hanging over this entire topic. What remains to hide, to answer the question posed in this video's title, is a great deal. The specific performance characteristics of quantum sensors being developed for submarine detection are classified. The current state of American and adversary progress toward a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, including the classified assessments of how close China is classified. The specific quantum communication protocols being developed for nuclear command and control survivability are classified. The quantum sensing capabilities being developed for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance applications that would allow monitoring of underground facilities, tracking of mobile missile launchers, and detection of electromagnetic emissions from adversary systems are classified. The defensive countermeasures being developed against adversary quantum sensing, measures that would allow American submarines to operate under a quantum sensing threat, are classified. And the specific timeline assessments that drove the Pentagon's decision to set hard 2030 and 2031 deadlines for quantum-resistant cryptography, assessments that presumably reflect intelligence about adversary quantum computing programs rather than just general theoretical projections, are classified. The unclassified picture that has emerged from the Pentagon's strategy documents, the executive orders, the F-35 procurement notices, the congressional research reports, and the Defense Science Board assessments is already alarming enough to have produced 2 executive orders in a single day and a strategy document that uses the word existential. The classified picture is what defense officials are actually responding to when they describe their level of concern, and the visible actions being taken in the open are the best available proxy for the seriousness of what that classified picture reveals. Subscribe with notifications on, because as more of this story becomes visible in the months ahead, we will be here to cover every piece of it, and we will see you in the next video. The quantum communication pillar of the Pentagon's strategy deserves more attention than it has received in most public coverage, because it represents the defensive dimension of a competition that is usually framed almost entirely in offensive terms. Most discussion of quantum computing and national security focuses on the offensive capability, the ability to break adversary encryption. But quantum communication, specifically quantum key distribution, offers a fundamentally different promise. A quantum communication channel uses the physical properties of quantum mechanics to distribute encryption keys in a way that is theoretically impossible to intercept without being detected. Any attempt to measure or copy the quantum states carrying the key inevitably disturbs those states in ways that the communicating parties can detect, meaning that eavesdropping reveals itself automatically rather than remaining invisible the way classical wiretapping can. If deployed at scale across military communications infrastructure, quantum key distribution would create secure channels that remain protected even against an adversary with a fully operational, cryptographically relevant quantum computer. Because the security of the channel derives from physics rather than from mathematical assumptions that quantum computers can overturn. The Pentagon's strategy addresses both sides of this coin, defending against adversary quantum computing by migrating to post-quantum cryptographic algorithms, and separately developing quantum communication capabilities for the most sensitive military channels, where even post-quantum classical cryptography may not provide sufficient assurance. The classified programs in this space are presumably the ones developing quantum communication links for nuclear command and control, strategic intelligence, distribution, and other applications where the consequence of successful eavesdropping or decryption would be catastrophic rather than merely serious. The workforce and industrial base dimension of the Pentagon's quantum strategy is the one that receives the least public attention, and that analysts consider among the most serious long-term vulnerabilities in the American quantum position. Building, operating, and maintaining quantum systems at military scale requires a workforce with skills that do not currently exist in anywhere near the numbers needed. Quantum hardware. Engineers capable of designing and fabricating superconducting qubit systems, neutral atom traps, or photonic quantum networks. Quantum algorithm developers capable of building the software that translates military requirements into circuits that run on current and near-term quantum hardware. quantum error correction specialists who can implement and optimize the fault-tolerant techniques that will be required for large-scale quantum computing. To be operationally reliable, quantum sensing engineers capable of translating laboratory demonstrations of gravimetric or magnetometric quantum sensing into ruggedized, deployable systems that can operate in contested environments, and quantum security specialists capable of managing the post-quantum cryptography transition across the full complexity of military IT infrastructure, from desktop computers to weapons platform firmware to satellite communication systems. The Section 231 provision of the FY 2025 National Defense Authorization Act directed DARPA to establish a quantum benchmarking initiative specifically to evaluate and accelerate the development of the components and subsystems needed to make quantum technology militarily useful. But benchmarking programs cannot create trained engineers faster than universities can graduate them, and the quantum workforce pipeline from graduate education to operational military capability is measured in decades, not years. China's centralized approach to quantum talent development, including state-directed programs that recruit quantum researchers from international universities, provides a concentrated investment in human capital that the more diffuse American approach is less structured to match. The allied coordination dimension of the quantum competition also requires explicit discussion, because the United States does not face this challenge alone, and the decisions made by allied governments significantly affect whether the democratic world collectively maintains its lead in quantum technology. The Five Eyes intelligence alliance, comprising the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, has been discussing quantum security coordination for several years, driven largely by shared concerns about the harvest, now decrypt later threat, and the timeline for adversary quantum computing capability. The UK's national quantum strategy committed £2.5 billion over 10 years, with an additional £2 billion in quantum computing procurement announced in early 2026. Australia has invested over $2.3 billion Australian dollars in quantum research and development, with specific attention to quantum sensing applications that are directly relevant to maritime domain awareness in the Indo-Pacific, including the submarine detection problem that looms over strategic competition in that region. Canada's 2025 federal budget included $334 million Canadian dollars in new quantum investment with specific attention to quantum defense applications. NATO has discussed quantum security standards, and NIST's post-quantum cryptographic algorithm standards, published in 2024, are designed for adoption across allied nations rather than solely within the United States. This allied quantum ecosystem represents a significant structural advantage in the competition with China, which lacks comparable networks of allied research institutions, shared hardware platforms, and coordinated policy frameworks. But that advantage only materializes if the coordination is genuinely executed, which requires sustained diplomatic investment and technical cooperation that goes beyond what any individual national program can accomplish alone. Like and subscribe, because the defense industrial-based dimension of this story reveals how the Pentagon's quantum ambitions translate into procurement reality. The defense industrial base that the Pentagon depends on to actually build and field quantum systems is also a source of significant concern among defense planners for reasons that go beyond the workforce pipeline. Quantum hardware manufacturing requires materials and components with supply chain dependencies that have not been fully characterized or secured. Dilution refrigerators, which are required to cool superconducting quantum processors to temperatures near absolute zero, depend in components that involve specialized manufacturing processes, concentrated in a small number of suppliers, some of which have significant exposure to Chinese material inputs or Chinese market participation. The rare earth elements used in quantum sensing G hardware, including the precision magnets and specialized electronics required for atomic clocks, gravimeters, and magnetometers, involve supply chains where China controls a substantial share of global refining capacity. The semiconductor fabrication processes required for superconducting qubit chips, photonic integrated circuits, and the classical control electronics that manage quantum systems involve the same advanced foundry capabilities that are at the center of the broader US-China semiconductor competition. Defense contractors entering the quantum supply chain for the first time, including those responding to solicitations like the F-35 IFED quantum upgrade contract, face a technology and supply chain landscape that is substantially different from the classical electronics procurement they are accustomed to managing. The Pentagon strategy documents acknowledge these supply chain vulnerabilities, but provide limited public detail on how they will be addressed, which is itself an indication that the specific mitigation plans involve classified program details that cannot be discussed openly. The DoD's 6 Critical Technology Areas framework, announced by Undersecretary of War Emil Michael in late 2025, placed quantum under the quantum and battlefield information dominance category, alongside resilient communications and navigation systems, signaling that the department views quantum not as a standalone research program, but as an integrated component of a broader information dominance architecture that must be hardened against both cyber and physical threats simultaneously. The timeline question is ultimately what everything in this story reduces to. How much time does the United States and its allies have before an adversary achieves the quantum capabilities that the Pentagon strategy describes as existential threats? The public record provides some guidance. Google's March 2026 white paper on quantum computing resources for breaking elliptic curve cryptography estimated fewer than 1,200 logical qubits and approximately 90 million gate operations required, a number significantly lower than previous estimates. Scott Aaronson, one of the most respected quantum computing theorists in the world and historically one of the most skeptical voices on near-term quantum claims, wrote publicly in approximately May of 2026 that some of the most reputable people in quantum hardware and error correction now tell him that a fault-tolerant quantum computer able to break deployed cryptographic systems ought to be possible by around 2029. Google set an internal deadline of 2029 for completing its own migration to post-quantum cryptography across all of its infrastructure, citing this specific threat timeline. The Pentagon strategy set a deadline of 2030 for high-impact military systems and 2031 for the entire force. The convergence of these independent timelines across Google's internal security planning, Aaronson's summary of hardware expert assessments, and the Pentagon's strategy deadlines points toward a window of 3 to 5 years as the period in which the quantum cryptographic threat could transition from serious future concern to present operational reality. What the classified picture looks like, what the intelligence community's assessment of Chinese quantum computing progress actually says, is what drives the specific urgency behind 2 executive orders signed on the same day and a strategy document that describes the threat to American military dominance with the word existential. The visible evidence is alarming. What remains hidden is what defense officials are actually responding to when they act, with the urgency that the public record now shows. Subscribe with notifications on, and we will see you in the next video. The Defense Science Board's conclusion that quantum radar will not provide upgraded capability to the Department of Defense is also worth examining, because it reveals something important about how the Pentagon distinguishes between quantum technologies that are genuinely militarily valuable and those that are overhyped in the public discourse. Quantum radar has been one of the more persistently discussed potential quantum military applications, with proponents suggesting that it could use entangled photon pairs to detect stealth aircraft by illuminating them with quantum-correlated light that classical radar-absorbing materials cannot fully defeat. The DSB's rejection of quantum radar as a viable military capability, confirmed in the most recent defense primer published by the Congressional Research Service in May of 2026, reflects a judgment that the theoretical advantages claimed for quantum radar do not survive the transition from laboratory conditions to operational military environments, the noise, loss, and realistic operating conditions. This is a useful reminder that not every quantum technology claim that circulates in defense policy discussions represents a genuine military capability on any near-term horizon, and that the Pentagon's classification of specific quantum programs reflects genuine assessments of operational potential rather than reflexive secrecy about anything with quantum in the name. The 3 areas the DSB identified as genuinely promising, sensing, computing, and communications, are the ones where the underlying physics produces advantages that are real, scaling, and in some cases already approaching operational readiness. Quantum radar is not among them, and the DSB's willingness to say so publicly is a useful calibration point for evaluating which quantum claims deserve serious attention and which represent wishful thinking dressed in scientific language. The convergence of quantum technology with artificial intelligence is the final dimension worth examining before we close, and it is the one that defense analysts believe could produce the most decisive military advantages over the longest time horizon. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's assessment noted explicitly that nations which successfully integrate quantum with AI-driven research platforms will compound their advantages exponentially. Quantum computers, as they